I grew up in a small town in the Ottawa Valley, and when I was young, as now, I really enjoyed the December holiday season. A time when school ended for an all-too-fast 2 weeks, when visits with families and friends filled the days, the special foods you would only get once a year like shortbread, cookies, or tortillere, the magic of a Christmas morning or the promise of a New Year's Eve, and of course, the holiday movies. Back in those days, films like It's a Wonderful Life played almost every day, always on different stations. It seemed like everyone had access to it, and it was just accepted that you would watch it. Its ubiquitousness made it a classic by default, regardless of what you actually thought about the film. My favorite, though, then as now, has always been the version of A Christmas Carol, starring Alistair Sim as Ebenezer Scrooge. Now, your mileage may vary when it comes to your favorite portrayal of fiction's finest miser turned benefactor. Perhaps you're a Frederick March guy, or a George C. Scott guy, or Patrick Stewart, or Michael Caine, or Jim Carrey, and they're all good choices, with something in those performances that anyone could and should take the time to appreciate. But Alistair Sim's sneering smugness, and how that makes way to his shivering panic, his shoulder-dropping shame, and his ultimate wild-eyed revelation and reinvention of self. My goodness, that's Christmas to me. Every Christmas Eve, usually pretty late, maybe even starting at the very stroke of midnight, that film would come on and I would watch it. And through watching Scrooge relive the Christmases of his childhood, I relived mine. I still do. That ability to connect a decades-old film with your own now decades-old experiences, it's the sort of experience, the sort of gift, something you get to have when you love old movies. Hello, film historians. I'm Derek and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to episode 18.
More like episode Great Teen.
Why do you do this?
I like rhyming words. What can I say?
Very well.
So we come rushing headlong into December now, and with that comes a new month theme.
With the holiday season approaching, we're going to look at some seasonal films, starting this week with 1947's It Happened on Fifth Avenue, starring one of our favorites, Don Defore.
Don Defore, of course, was one of the stars of the film we covered way back in episode 2, Too Late for Tears, and he was great in that one. Go back and check it out if you haven't already.
Totally. But before we get too focused on this week's film, let's take care of business.
Okay. Well, that means by asking you, our awesome listeners, to take a moment while you are here to click like, subscribe, and share. It might be a different thing to click depending on what platform you are using to listen to us, but please help us out by doing that. Every share in particular is really helpful and brings new listeners to us all the time. And we like a crowd.
Because things you enjoy are best enjoyed with other people who enjoy it too.
So, thanks for being here. Thanks for checking our show out, and please feel free to hit us up on the socials and let us know what's up with you.
Do you think people know they can reach us on the Facebook?
Well, they can, at I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
Well, sure. But what if they're more into Instagram? Folks these days like the Instagram.
Well, we've got that covered too. Just find I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
I read that some people prefer Twitter.
No problem. Find us there at ILOM Podcast.
Some people like sending good old-fashioned emails.
Oh, I'm one of them. If you are one too, drop us a line at iloveoldmoviesthepodcast@gmail.com.
All one word.
So this is kind of a big week for you.
Kind of.
And this is because earlier today, you went for your road test to get your driver's license.
I did. Big thanks to the cool folks at the Lindsay Drive Test Center. It was over before I knew it.
Just that's pretty cool. Like, here you are doing a real thing, hitting one of those major milestones on your way to adulthood. We don't talk all that much about ourselves on the show, but I think this is a pretty fun detail that most people could relate to.
True enough. It was pretty cool, honestly. I've come a long way from when I used to cry every time I had to pull into our laneway or make a left-hand turn anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's worth taking a moment to celebrate. And if people want, they can give you a big welcome to the world of driving shout-out in the comments. Fair?
Fair.
All right, so moving on.
Yes, we're now in seasonal movies December, and we're coming up quickly on our 20th episode. And we're going to have another spectacular for that one, which we are really looking forward to.
Yes, we are getting in touch with some friends from the podcast world.
And beyond.
And beyond, yes. And we are going to throw around the idea of what is the greatest on-screen portrayal of Santa Claus in film history.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
Right?
I think we're going to have some really cool ones be mentioned.
Well, good guests will make for great choices in discussion, and we've got some great guests lined up.
We do indeed. Joining us on the show will be Mallory Jacobson from the Movie Lovers podcast.
Yeah.
Mallory guested on our 10th episode, and we've been excited to have her back the first chance we could. It's going to be great that she'll be here, and in the meantime, go give her podcast, which she does with her partner Jonah, a listen.
We'll link that.
And also, Bill Van Vagel from Phantom Galaxy and Land of the Creeps will be joining us as well. Bill was also part of our 10th episode doing the cold open, and now he's going to be on the show giving us his take on the whole Santa Claus thing.
You know, with his love of horror films, I am expecting something unexpected.
That's probably wise.
Check out Bill at those podcasts, and we've linked those too.
We'll bring you the rest of our guests next week.
And if you would like to share your thoughts with us on who is the greatest film Santa of all time, send us an email and we will read it on the show.
Or send us a sound clip and we'll play it.
Yes, definitely do that. It would be fun to share what you think with everyone. Get in touch. Let's make it happen.
As well, if you would ever like to read a cold open for our show, we're always looking for guests to do that as well. Do you have a nostalgic story about how film affected your life? Let's hear it.
I want to hear it.
Everyone wants to.
After the 20th episode, we will finish up with a special end of season 1 bonus episode.
Yup. In it, we'll take a look at all of the movies that we've reviewed so far and work out a master list of best to worst. And that'll be our official film rankings up to this point.
I already know my number 1.
You're ahead of me.
And then, after that, we will be taking a brief break for the holidays, and we will return in the first week of January with a new episode and the Season 2 launch.
All request month of January. Get your requests in.
And we also have even bigger news.
Bigger than all that?
Yeah.
All of that was pretty big.
Bigger. Now, we can't actually say anything yet, but something big is coming, and you don't even have to wait very long for it. There are big doings in January. Get ready. It's going to be awesome. I've already said too much.
Man, we're kind of busy.
Yeah. Okay. No more delay. It happened on Fifth Avenue. Let's go.
Yes.
Our director today is Roy Del Ruth. Del Ruth started his career as a writer for producer Max Sennett in 1915 before directing alongside Sennett for films such as Hungry Lions in 1920. Throughout the 1920s, he was involved in the production of many films such as Asleep at the Switch in 1923 and The Little Irish Girl in 1926. Del Ruth even directed Warner Brothers' first ever color film, The Desert Song, in 1929. Del Ruth had a successful transition into talkies, directing several musicals before directing James Cagney in Blonde Crazy, as well as the very first adaptation of Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon in 1931. In the 30s and 40s, Del Ruth was churning out films pretty quickly, with 10 films being released in a 4-year time span. Almost all of his films were decent, or above average, and he worked with a wide variety of genres, but mostly focused on crime, such as It Had to Happen, and musicals, such as Born to Dance, which he made with James Stewart. During the period of 1932 to 1941, Del Ruth was actually the second highest paid director in Hollywood. While directing a few more films in the early 1950s, Del Ruth collaborated with James Cagney several more times, and worked with actors such as Judy Garland, Bette Davis, and Gene Kelly. Del Ruth's career then started taking a decline in work, and he eventually took a break from directing for 5 years. He made his comeback with the low-budget film called The Alligator People, before making his final film called Why Must I Die? He died in 1961 at the age of 67.
Our writer is Everett Freeman. The majority of his work consisted of short stories he wrote that were then adapted into films. In the 1930s, Freeman wrote radio comedies such as Baby Snooks. Hollywood later picked up one of his short stories, $1,000 a Minute, before adapting it into a film in 1935. This led to him co-writing Married Before Breakfast in 1937 and The Chaser in 1938. Freeman was then asked to write the screenplay for You Can't Cheat an Honest Man by W.C. Fields in 1939. During World War II, Freeman made training films for soldiers before Warner Brothers asked him to work on a fundraiser movie with as many celebrities as possible in order to raise funds for the war effort. This resulted in Thank Your Lucky Stars in 1943, starring Humphrey Bogart, Bette Davis, and Errol Flynn. In the late 1940s, Freeman wrote numerous different screenplays that were almost all based off of original stories of his, such as Too Young to Kiss and $1 Million Mermaid. Freeman began his transition to television in the 1950s, debuting as the producer of the Bachelor Father series. He wrote scripts for General Electric Theater before returning to filmmaking in 1962. He wrote a few more films towards the end of his career, including 2 that starred Doris Day. Freeman was a member of the Writers Guild of America and founder of the Producers Guild of America. He died in 1991 at the age of 79.
So, normally we would discuss the life and career of the top star of the film at this point, but we've already discussed the ever-dapper Don Defore in episode 2. So if you want to hear all about him, that's available for you. And we will turn our attention to some of the other stars of the film, starting with Victor Moore. A well-rounded and diverse actor who enjoyed a prolific career on screen and on stage, Victor Moore might be one of the few actors to have a bus terminal named after him.
What an odd tribute.
Yeah. Born in New Jersey, Moore and his first wife worked together as a vaudeville team for years, while his career in silent films began taking off, and that kept him steadily in work through the teens and 20s. He was also appearing on Broadway in many plays at this time, and his first appearance on a Broadway stage was in 1896 in a play called Rosemary, and he was still acting on stage in 1940 in Irving Berlin's Louisiana Purchase, which he also appeared in the film version of. Moore transitioned to talkies easily, and continued working in films, television, and even some radio from the 1930s well into the 50s. Now, his resume isn't filled with classics, or even really big memorable hits, but he did have some interesting co-workers. Moore appeared with Ginger Rogers in several films, and with Bob Hope in several films, and his last movie appearance, The 7-Year Itch, he added a Marilyn Monroe film to his career. Now, Moore's second marriage was a bit scandalous, and it was something that wasn't made public for over a year after the wedding.
Why was that?
Well, it was mostly to do with the fact that there was a 45-year age gap between Moore, then 65, and his wife Shirley Page, who was 20.
20?
Yep.
That sounds sketchy.
It sure does. But you'll be happy to know that the marriage lasted for 20 years, until Moore's death in 1962.
I don't think that makes me happy at all. Yeah, I'm not surprised they kept that one on the hush-hush. I'm not sure how a year would have made it different, though.
Well, she was then 21, and legally an adult in all states.
Ugh.
Yep.
The other actor we're profiling today is Gail Storm. Under her birth name, Josephine Caudle, Storm won a radio station contest in Texas called Gateway to Hollywood. When she advanced to the national finals, she won that as well and was rewarded with a new stage name and a contract with RKO. While she didn't stay at RKO long, she became established enough that she was able to get steady work with studios like Universal and in a range of B films. Appearances in films with groups like the East Side Kids and the Three Stooges were common early in her career. She was largely a film actress in the 1940s, with It Happened on Fifth Avenue considered one of her best films, or if not that one, the 1950s The Underworld Story, where she co-starred with Dan Duryea.
That guy.
Love him!
Right?
The 1950s saw her transition into television, starring in 2 series, My Little Margie and The Gail Storm Show, Oh Susanna. She also began to reinvent herself as a music performer and started her own Las Vegas show. While her recording career only lasted 2 years, she had 6 top 10 hits, including Dark Moon, that went all the way to number 4 in the charts, and I Hear You Knocking, which hit number 2.
Why didn't she stick with the singing?
Her husband wanted her at home more, and a music career is a lot of work.
That was the death knell of a lot of great female recording stars in the 1950s. Wanda Jackson, Lori Collins, now Gail Storm too.
Stupid patriarchy.
You said it.
By the 1960s, her career was essentially over, and by the 1970s, struggles with alcoholism prevented her from finding work on the usual circuit of TV shows that hired guest stars. She did do 2 episodes of The Love Boat before finishing her career with an appearance on Murder, She Wrote. Gail Storm passed away in 2009 at the age of 87.
The story of the production of It Happened on Fifth Avenue is the tale of a director that had better things to do and a film studio that really wanted to up its game.
I'm already intrigued.
So the script and its rights had been banging around Hollywood since the mid-1940s, and at one point Frank Capra was attached to direct it for Liberty Films. Capra, though, left the production to direct a different film, and the project collapsed, leaving Roy Del Ruth to acquire the rights and take them to Monogram Pictures, a studio famed for making super low-budget B-films.
Film Capra made instead. It wasn't...
It sure was.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yep.
Okay, so how low budget are we talking with Monogram? How cheap were these guys?
Way cheap. Like, the average budget per film, their average budget was about 1/10 of what bigger studios would do.
You can't see this, but my finger is in my shirt collar and I'm doing the thing. Okay, so they had no dough. Got it.
Well, get this. Monogram wanted to shed the whole "we make cheap movies" reputation and opened a new division of the company called Allied Artists Pictures, which was to be the more high-end, high-budget part. Just normal budgets for the studio. Del Ruth came on board, and It Happened on Fifth Avenue became the first film that they made under this new branding.
And did they invest in it?
Oh, yeah. Typically, Monogram was spending less than $100,000 to make a film in those days. But this one came in, over budget mind you, at well over $1 million. With the hope being a film with a great cast and high production values and a Christmastime setting would become an instant holiday classic, Allied made the curious decision not to release the film at Christmastime, but rather at Easter.
Yeah, one holiday is the same as another.
Of course.
I can't imagine anyone would notice.
Well...
Did the film do well? Where were the audiences and critics on this one?
People liked it, and it had no difficulty making back its budget and turning a modest profit. And over the years, it even developed a bit of a cult following. That the film wasn't shown on TV for over 2 decades at one point, and there was also a lot of difficulty in its arrival to the home theater market and a delayed arrival on streaming services. It's all a bit surprising, since it was a minor hit and an Academy Award nominee.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, this film was only released on DVD in 2008, and on Blu-ray in 2020. Anyway, it streams on HBO Max now, which is not even available in all countries, certainly not here in Canada.
Oof.
Critics were mostly split at the time. Some found it charming, while others found it childish. Probably the most interesting review came from Time magazine, which mastered the art of damning with faint praise when they wrote, "Most plausible explanations for this picture's success are 1. The presence of Victor Moore, past master of creaky charm and pathos. 2. A show as generally old-fashioned in a harmless way as a 1910 mail-order play for amateurs. 3. The fact that now, as in 1910, a producer cannot go wrong with a mass audience if he serves up a whiff of comedy and a whirlwind of hokum."
I'm gonna go ahead and assume that was a negative review.
Yeah, most likely. What's the tail of the tape on this one, Sam?
Okay, we have a 7.7 on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
The audience score is 79% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the tomato meter is unavailable. The film won no awards, but was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Story. The film can be watched on HBO Max in some countries, and it's available in the Microsoft Store.
We open on a photograph of Fifth Avenue, I guess, in New York. There's cars and buses just frozen in time.
Wait, is it a painting? Or a photo?
Oh, maybe it is a painting.
I'm quite curious about what happens on Fifth Avenue.
It.
The credits all run over the still frame. I love old credits with the ... between the name and their role in the film.
Now a tour bus is driving down Fifth Avenue explaining how rich it is, and we hear the name of Michael J. O'Connor, the second richest man in the world. He owns a big boarded-up brownstone. And then this very sketchy-looking guy, that sort of very dignified-looking hobo-type character you would see in old movies, he skulks around the house, finds a secret door in the fence, and finds a way into the house.
He crawls into a manhole. Does he live in the sewer?
No, the sewer leads into the mansion, and this guy makes himself quite at home in the big empty mansion. It turns out that he and his dog Sammy have been here before. O'Connor leaves every winter, and this guy moves in.
We then come to an apartment building that is being torn down by O'Connor's company. One tenant won't leave. He's a veteran and believes he shouldn't be evicted. And it's Don Defore.
In his underwear.
Mr. Jim Bullock is his name, and he handcuffs himself to the bed so security can't move him. So more men come and carry him out, bed and all. And next we see him, he's sleeping on a park bench.
Clothed, thankfully.
We see the hobo, and he and Bullock meet. Hobo is dressed to the nines in the rich man clothes of Michael O'Connor.
Jim talks about his homeless problem, but the hobo, who introduces himself as Aloysius McKeever, invites him to stay in the mansion, explaining that O'Connor is wintering in Virginia, and he stays there every winter.
Next, we meet O'Connor reading about Jim's eviction in the paper. He doesn't like the bad press.
But O'Connor's building is just part of his plan. His big deal is to buy some land from the government to build a huge air-sea-land shipping depot.
So, Amazon?
Pretty much.
But in the 40s?
Yeah. The dude's a total futurist. And while impressing his business partners with his plans, his daughter's school calls. Trudy might have run away from school. Did she run to her mother? Who knows? He hires private detectives to find her.
That's a bit of overkill. She just skipped school.
Meanwhile, someone else has arrived at the O'Connor home, and that concerns the men. They hide in the shadows and watch Trudy come and pack her things. They think she is a thief here to rob the house.
Every bit of comedy in this so far is really flat.
Trudy overhears the men discussing the whole squatting thing, and she knows that they are scammers. But when they confront her, she fools them, saying she broke in to steal a coat.
She wants to get a job in a sheet music store, you see.
As one does.
She fakes that she's just some girl.
Aloysius and Jim come clean as to their interloper status in the house. Trudy makes up a story about having a lazy, abusive, drunken father. She doesn't want to be sent away, so they decide to let her stay in the house.
Next day, Trudy is playing piano and singing at the music store, and she gets hired. Jim is there to watch.
And they flirt. And that seems sudden.
What is this budding romance? How old is she?
18?
He looks like he's in his 30s.
By chance, Jim bumps into two of his old army buddies and their families, and these two guys are a bit house poor. They're trying to land an apartment, but since they have kids, they can't get one. One of the guys is played by Alan Hale Jr., who played Skipper on Gilligan's Island.
So Jim moves them all into O'Connor's house. But McKeever isn't very enthusiastic about this. But he shares his views on life. Figure out what people want the most and give it to them. Well, the three men want jobs and places to live, so he suggests that they find some abandoned army barracks and live there. They could even buy one. In fact, there's a camp right out of the city that they could buy from the government.
Camp Kilson.
But
that's the same place O'Connor wants to buy for his depot.
That evening, Trudy shows up and she and Jim get a big ol' flirt going on. You know, I don't even want to talk about the idea of them having a romance.
Okay, I don't want to talk about all the jokes in this movie.
The next day at the music store, O'Connor finds Trudy. He wants to send her back to school. She says she's in love. She tells her father about the squatters and is quite happy about how it's all working out. But O'Connor loses his mind over this.
You can't really blame him.
No.
Trudy is sad, you see. Her mom and dad are separated. She's been shipped off to school. She's lonely. O'Connor agrees to meet Jim, but not as O'Connor. He's going to play the drunken, abusive father of 14 kids that Trudy told the story about. So they get some old clothes and create the ruse.
And soon,
Jim and Trudy are singing a song while McKeever whistles along, and they see a poor man on a bench, cold and hungry. Trudy wants to invite this old man, who's really her dad, to the house.
What about how he was going to pretend to be her father? Did they just skip that?
I guess. O'Connor recognizes Jim from the newspaper article about the eviction, so that part's bad, and he is shocked to see his house filled with homeless people doing their laundry.
Jim and Whitey have planned their Army barrack housing project and build a model for everything. 12-unit buildings suitable for small families. O'Connor scoffs at the idea. It's kind of a cool plan, though. And it feels sort of relevant. Affordable housing is a major concern in many communities, like right now. And this movie was talking about it in the 40s. I wasn't expecting that kind of connection.
Now pretending to be a squatter in his own home, O'Connor pitches in by doing dishes, which he's awful at, and he has to sleep in the servants' quarters, which he does not like. He goes off to make a big important business call, but Aloysius and Jim overhear him, and they think he's play acting at being a millionaire.
Poor guy's just lost his marbles.
This is just getting increasingly ridiculous.
Soon, O'Connor is getting upset at this whole arrangement. He wants to toss the whole bunch of them back on the street and tells Trudy to get rid of them, so she telegrams her mom to come to New York urgently.
Mom arrives instantly and has a plan to fix everything. She will get some old clothes and pretend to be homeless and move into the house too.
What the hell?
And now the O'Connor family is reunited in the house, with all of them pretending to be homeless down and outers so they don't tip off the squatters as to their identity.
Hey, if I asked you, would you and Mom drop everything and pretend to be homeless so you could meet my maybe boyfriend?
Who is also a squatter who has moved into our home?
Yes.
That's a hard sell, kid.
The former couple fights and battles like always. Mary, the mom, supports Trudy's love of Jim. Trudy wants to win Jim without the money being an issue, so he loves her for her, not the money. Hence all the trickery.
Meanwhile, Jim has arranged investors and wants to go to a construction company. But O'Connor owns that company and tells them not to buy into Jim's idea. Instead, give Jim a great job that will take him out of the country. But the offer will be contingent upon his being single.
We next get a nice family dinner scene where McKeever tells tales of the O'Connor family and speculates on how miserable and unhappy they were. This hits home to Mary, Mike, and Trudy.
Jim turns the job in Bolivia down, and as they all trim a Christmas tree, O'Connor asks Jim for the details of the barracks plan, and he realizes that they've been bidding on the same property, Camp Kilson.
McKeever notices that Mike and Mary seem to be falling in love with each other. He thinks that is adorable. He even thinks they should get married. O'Connor admits his feelings, his hopes for reconciliation. He never wanted the divorce.
And on Christmas Eve, the squatters and Trudy sing some wonderful songs while McKeever dresses as Santa. Jim is sad, though, and he tells Trudy they lost the property. To O'Connor himself, of all people.
Mary tells Mike he should give the property to Jim and the rest as a gift.
Jim gives Trudy a gift, a nice, expensive coat. Not mink, but nice. She feels she can't keep it, but she tells Jim how wonderful he is.
The next day, which I guess is Christmas, Jim goes and tells all the investors, old army buddies, about losing the property to O'Connor. O'Connor's men show up to evict everyone that is living there, and the barracks are to be torn down. And a riot breaks out.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. That night, Jim and Trudy go for a nice dinner.
On Christmas night? Do people do that? The restaurant is packed.
Jim has decided to go to Bolivia after all. Trudy doesn't like it. She gets really upset. She goes to her parents, and O'Connor offers to give Jim a proper job.
McKeever is sad since the deal fell through. He's disheartened. He says that a house is the people who live in it, and the O'Connor house doesn't seem the same anymore, and he wants to not come back.
Mike, the homeless gentleman, reveals that he is O'Connor, and he gives the property to Jim for the barracks project. But he doesn't want McKeever to know his identity. They all have a nice New Year's Eve dinner, and McKeever says that life without friends is a serious form of poverty.
Jim and Trudy go to get married. As McKeever walks off, O'Connor says that there are men richer than him. And next year, McKeever can come in the front door.
Well, a lot certainly happened on Fifth Avenue.
I'll say. Okay, let's get to pros and cons.
My pros. Aloysius McKeever. Full of wisdom and charm, this is a career-defining type character. He's quite honestly this great guy, and the movie is his world. Everything revolved around him, yet the major plot points and conflicts didn't really involve him at all. It was a very creative way to utilize a main character. The portrayal is great, the character is great. He's a true classic. 2. The screwball situations. Having a squatter who makes his life living in mansions while the owners are away is a great starting point. And then cramming as many people into that mansion so it almost becomes a community and an extended family is a neat, novel script idea. The setup is great. And then we get the ironic situation of Jim blind bidding against O'Connor for Camp Kilson. The scriptwriters were onto something here, and I think as much as a strength, that's the big frustration of this film. You have this incredible premise that you can ultimately boil down to. People need access to affordable housing, and it's up to the mega rich to help make that happen. And that's an idea that resonates today in an era where the mega rich build their own spaceships while their employees are working for minimum wage. This is a really strong and forward-thinking script and film here, but it's bloated and it's overdone, and that robs us of a really special film with a message. Number 3, seeing a young Alan Hale Jr. as Jim's pal Whitey was a real treat. If you only know Hale Jr. from his time as the skipper on Gilligan's Island, you might be surprised to see what a tall, handsome, and charming screen presence he had. His character was a bit underserved by the script. Fair enough, it wasn't his story. But I'd like to see more of this performer. He had a really good movie star vibe that I did not expect. My cons. Number 1, the comedy. There was none. The jokes were awful. The lines were terrible. The physical jokes were terrible. It's not that the movie has no charm. It does, but it doesn't really have humor. And they try to be cutesy funny way too often. Number 2, the romances. Jim and Trudy happens way too fast, and it's way too unearned. And the O'Connors getting back together is too trite and melodramatic. So for a movie billed as a romance comedy, I realize I'm criticizing it for not being funny and having unbelievable romance. This, in my mind, is the big failure of this film. It has a lot of interesting pieces in terms of characters and plot points and dramatic potential, but it all gets wasted on the stuff that it's not very good at. Number 3, the runtime. This movie is just way too long, and there are just too many twists and turns. The movie seemed like it could have been over at a 75-minute mark, and that would be fine. It's just too decompressed a script. There's a saying I thought about a lot when I watched this film. No good movie is ever too long, and no bad one is ever short enough.
Oof. And is it a watch?
I feel like this film exists, and it's not overtly bad, so sure. On principle, it's a watch. We want people to watch old movies, so yes, give it a look. Just expectations low. Okay, you're up.
Okay, so my pros. 1. McKeever. What a cool character. He was like this wise old homeless dude who was giving everyone life advice. He was awesome. And he had some really good lines. He was a very interesting character with a lot going on, so I found myself paying attention when he was on screen. 2. Don Defore. I love that guy. He was great in Too Late for Tears, and he was honestly one of my favorite things about this film. He's very interesting to watch on screen, and he has a pretty laid-back, cool kind of demeanor. I'm glad we got to watch another film with him in it. 3. The sets. They were pretty great. They were big and fancy while still being nice and detailed. I loved the wall surrounding the house and the little secret door that everyone used. The scene where they were decorating the Christmas tree was really nice. The whole room was pretty, but the tree was very beautiful. The rooms were all very open and spacious. I just really enjoyed how they looked on camera. My cons. 1. McKeever's voice. So, as I just said, I love the character. But his voice, ugh. His voice was all scraggly and he was kind of slurring his words. Was he drunk? It certainly sounded like it. I don't know. I just really liked the character, so I would have liked to have heard and understood everything that he was saying. 2. Jim and Trudy. I absolutely hated whatever that was. For the first, 30 minutes, it seems like Trudy is 17 or something since she's still in school, so that was an immediate nope from me. We find out she's actually 18, but still. Come on. Almost all of the interactions between them were just Trudy being all lovey-dovey and Jim completely ignoring her. And then all of a sudden they're together, I guess? Ugh. I just didn't like the whole thing, and I didn't buy that they actually loved each other. 3. The singing. In the scene where Trudy was walking with Jim and McKeever and they saw O'Connor on the bench, but they were singing? Why were they singing? Is this a musical now? Seriously, why did this happen? Just 15 seconds of random singing. It was completely unnecessary. This was not nearly the greatest film ever, but I guess it's a watch.
And that's it. Another episode is in the books.
It sure is. Now we can get down to the business of next week's movie and the 20th episode spectacular.
And in the meantime, take a moment to let us know if you like this episode. Especially if you've ever seen the movie, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Just fire us an email. We love that stuff.
And until next week, always remember that if you like what you heard, you don't have to keep it to yourself.
No.
We are not a secret. You can spread the word all you want about our show.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might like squatting in some rich guy's mansion as much as you do.
Maybe even more. For Sam the Sidekick, I'm Derek, and I love old movies. Additional research for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, is done by Nikki Weatherden. Audio clips come from freefx.co.uk. Images are used through the provisions of fair use, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, is by The Crocs.